Top 20 tight ends in the NFL. The next of the skill positions, another really interesting position, a little bit more top heavy than the rest of them. But so for this exercise, I don't include injuries because the point is to look at what is actually valuable when you talk about players on an NFL field. It's not even so much the players themselves, though, obviously, for the current year, that's what we're talking about. It's more about looking what causes a certain player to be better than another, and that can identify, who – when switching teams is going to be a lot better, who when we get into rookie stuff is a lot better, that type of thing. That's kind of the whole point of this. So I don't necessarily take injuries into consideration for this because it's just about how useful the player is when they're on the field. This is just for this season. So stuff like, I would rather have this player for the next 5 years or this player's getting older, whatever. I don't really care. This is just about the 2021 NFL season. Again, it's about who helps you on the field the most, not necessarily who's the best, who's the most skilled. It's when this player is on your offense, who provides you with the most benefits, right? It's not fantasy rankings. It's just how good the players are, colors of tiers, and no rookies. Rookies, I'll tell you how good they are once they get on an NFL field. Before that, ain't much point in it. So real quick, first 5 out, not going to talk about them too much. Cam Brate, Noah Fant, Kyle Rudolph, Gronk, and Eric Ebron, 2 notable ones here. Noah Fant, he's just not actually skilled at all at this point. And Gronk, who at this point, he lost the blocking ability that made him super elite. And as a receiver, he's more of just a smart possession guy at this point. So then the top 20. Let's go. So first, Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper prevents a pretty important baseline for the tight end position because all the guys below him on this list, you're missing a little bit of something if they're the tight end in your offense like full time. Whereas with Austin Hooper, you're not. Now he doesn't provide any additional benefit to your offense almost at all, but he certainly doesn't suck. He doesn't suck at anything. He's probably above average blocker. He's a player who can use space, and this actually he's a good way to segue into a theme with this whole list, which is tight ends in the NFL, as far as receiving ability goes, which is still the most important, kind of fall into one of 2 categories. It's guys who create your offense opportunities, and it's guys who, when given opportunities, take advantage of them at different levels with different levels of success. And I'll highlight the differences as we get into certain players. And obviously, just like with any other offensive position, guys who create opportunities are certainly more important because that's the hardest thing to do and the most valuable thing there is on an NFL field. But as opposed to all the other positions, this is probably the one that's the least separated between them because in the modern NFL, at the tight end spot, you are afforded a lot more opportunities just by virtue of being on the field because of how the offenses work than at, especially wide receiver, but also at running back. So those are kind of the 2 types of tight ends. Like I said, the first one more valuable, but the other one is important. And blocking, definitely important, but you can really make up for that in some ways. And frankly, there's just not that many good blockers, even at the tight end position nowadays in the NFL. So Austin Hooper, like I said, he doesn't really add anything to your offense, but when given chances, he'll do fine. He's not going to be worse than most other players. He does have strong hands in traffic, which is definitely positive. Like I said, he's a pretty good blocker. He's, not a player like you're far from screwed if he's on your team, but he's not really creating anything. TJ Hawkinson next, pretty much the same, really. Obviously, Lions probably had higher hopes than that when they drafted him in the top 10, which is still kind of unbelievable. And the reason he's higher is because he is a little bit just better when given chances. He's faster. He is a little bit better after the catch, that type of thing. But as a receiver, he's just still so far away from really good in any meaningful way that it keeps him down here. Like I said, athletically and presume potentially, like I've talked about before, I don't necessarily believe in potential in that sense, but he could be better. I just don't necessarily see it. He's just a guy who's athletic, who doesn't necessarily use all that great, which is, again, with all these tight ends, really common theme because these guys are all athletic monsters really at this point, and it's more about who's actually able to use that skill to help their team, which T.J. Hawkinson at this point still doesn't really do. Will Dissly, again, it's kind of the same thing as the last 2 guys, just progressively a little bit better at it. Will Dissly actually reaching the point where he's decent as a receiver. He can use space pretty well if it's given to him. He's not a disaster, ask him to run seams or that type of thing. But he's still, as a blocker, just pretty mediocre, actually worse than the two guys ahead of him. And as a receiver, yeah, he's not going to like kill guys in zone and man coverage. He's not going to eat up zone coverage consistently. He's just kind of there more or less. Then we have a tier jump here, and these two guys are really similar. And there's going to be, I would suspect, some pushback on this because Johnny Smith has a bigger name than the 17th best tight end in the NFL, and especially with the hype he had going into the fantasy year last year, a lot of people are going to know more about him than the guys ahead of him, but it doesn't make him better. Johnny Smith, he is definitely good after the catch, pretty good, but he's not necessarily better than a lot of the other guys, even Hayden Hurst right in front of him. And as a receiver, he's kind of similar to TJ Hawkinson. He's just not that good. If you ask him to consistently run routes, he's not going to add anything outside of once every, 15, 20 plays. He's going to break a couple more tackles than other guys, which is valuable. I mean, he is still in the top 20 here, but there's other things you can do that all the guys ahead of him do that are just better. And as a blocker, yeah, he's good downfield, close to the line of scrimmage. He's kind of mediocre, but yeah, he's a player, if you use him right in a smart offense, he's going to put up numbers for sure. He's definitely useful, but the guys ahead of him, I just think they're all at this point effectively just better. And yeah, Hayden Hurst, kind of really the same player, just better as a receiver, really. Obviously spent the first few years of his career on the Ravens where he didn't have an opportunity to do much anything because of the way they run offense. Now, he still did stuff, and you could clearly see he was good. And even last year on the Falcons, I mean, you got to remember how stupid the offense they run there under Steve Sarkisian is. And it kind of brings despite having top 3 to 5 offensive talent, they don't really put up the numbers because of that. And I would put a lot on obviously their defense was horrible too, so they kind of kept the offense off the field. But yeah, Hayden Hurst, he can get the job done for sure. He uses space pretty well. As a blocker, he's actually pretty good. And yeah, he's overall a decent player, but doesn't add a ton. So then another tier jump, and this is probably the first name that people are surprised about as far as high goes. That's Anthony Firkser. Anthony Firkser is good. He has been the best tight end on the Titans for the last couple of years over Johnny Smith. He is a player who legitimately creates space as a receiver between like 0 to 15 yards. I mean, he's really good at it. He even beats guys in man, like safeties and stuff, in man coverage, all that type of thing. He knows what he's doing against zone. The reason he's down here, despite that being super valuable, is like if his receiver rankings, he'd be a lot higher. But he's just kind of there as a blocker, not super special. Once the ball's in his hands, really mediocre. Probably the worst in the top 20, but still, he's valuable enough as an actual receiver in terms of providing. Because, I mean, he borderline provides the same type of utility that like a slot receiver of maybe Jameson Crowder's level does. Maybe he's a little bit worse than that, but he's legitimately good and useful. And the same goes for the nice guy, Jack Doyle. If you're talking about between the hashes, within 15 yards, he's really, really good. And he's going to consistently be open, consistently create your team first downs and opportunities. Reason Jack Doyle's higher, he's a way better blocker than Firkser. He legitimately is probably one of the top 7 to 10 blocking tight ends in the NFL. He's been hurt a lot, obviously, recently, which is going to kind of keep him in some people's minds lower. But, yeah, he's a really good player. He knows what he's doing for sure. Then we have David Njoku. David Njoku is good. And that's pretty clear if you watch tape and you kind of see what he does. Production-wise, obviously, because of injuries and because of the team he's played on, been a lot lower. But you got to remember, he plays on, at this point, the second heaviest run team in the NFL outside of the Ravens and the Browns. He is behind on the depth chart another guy, Austin Hooper, and he's also behind or competing with the rookie from last year, Harrison Bryant, who's decent in his own right for playing time. And given his injuries and he had some contract issues, they kind of kept him off the field a little more than he should have been. But you can clearly see when he's on the field, I mean, he does all the stuff that the guys that I've talked about so far does, but he does it better. And he also adds the ability, not to the level of Johnny Smith, but maybe 80% of that as far as the after the catch guy. And the point is, David Njoku, if he was put into a situation that would accentuate what he's doing more, I have very little doubt that he would be way, way better than he's shown so far. Or not that he has shown he's been that good, but then his production would suggest. So yeah, David Njoku does belong this high for sure. I can understand why people would put him lower, like I said, because the injury, that type of stuff. But as an actual player on the field, really good. So then we have a tier jump. Now we're getting into guys who are like legit positives. All the tier breaks and all the guys up to this have been within the same, very little spread. of meaningful ability in the NFL, all really close. But here you get into a pretty clearly different tier where you're taking a step ahead. So first is Zach Ertz, yes, still at this age. Had a tough year production-wise on the Eagles last year through injuries and because of the quarterback, whatever happened there. But as a player, Zach Ertz, one of the best separation creators in the intermediate game there is at the tight end position. Absolutely dominant. Only player that even rivals Travis Kelce as far as beating zone coverages and understanding how to run routes and how to get open that way. As a blocker, he is not great, but I actually think he is underrated in that aspect. People decided that he sucked because he was more of a receiving tight end. And he's not good, but he's really not bad, and he knows what he's doing, especially as a guy in space, just with his athletic ability, even at this age. He's not a disaster. So, yeah, Zach Ertz, you're getting a really useful player who is going to be similar to, again, those types of slot receivers who are constantly open, and I think that's a skill set that goes really underrated through common NFL talk as far as being really useful. Evan Ingram, another frustrating one, but, yeah, that guy just gets open probably better than anyone until we get to the top 5 here. He has way bigger glaring issues than the guys ahead of him, hence why he's this low in terms of his drop issues being horrible, him being the worst blocker in the top 20 by a comfortable distance. But as a receiver, yeah, he could easily be in the top 5. That's the only thing we were talking about. He's going to get more separation again than anyone outside of the top 5. And there is still a lot of value in that. And even as an after-the-catch player, he's pretty good. And frankly, his drop issues aren't even as bad as people make it seem, because when you talk about drop issues, right, it's not like he's out here dropping 20% of the passes that he could catch, right? It's still maybe 10 or 15 in the season as opposed to 10 or something like that, just off the top of my head, which does make a difference for sure, but isn't this catastrophic failing when you consider the other things he adds to your offense, especially, on a team that would use him maybe a little bit smarter than what the Giants have done, and especially in his first couple of years in the NFL. But, yeah, he's a player who provides a lot of value if the offensive team is knowing what they're doing. Then Jared Cook, still really good at this age. He actually, a lot of the stuff I talked about Zach Ertz applies to him. He's a player who knows exactly what he's doing, gets open really well, actually beats man coverage as opposed to most of the other guys. He's just also way better after the catch. Way, way better. And as a blocker, why actually probably argues a little bit worse. Again, he's not horrible. And yeah, with him, you have an option on offense who's going to legitimately provide you value as a receiver, which at the tight end position isn't all that common. Then we have Tyler Higbee. He is the next in this line of guys I talked about who are kind of got away from this, but who are more space users as opposed to space creators. Kind of all of the last 5, 6 guys we talked about are guys who create space. Tyler Higbee doesn't do that so much, though he's not horrible at it. He's more of a guy who, if you give him a 5-yard check down or whatever, he can fairly consistently break tackles. He can get first downs. He knows what he's doing as far as an intermediate receiver goes. And as a blocker, he's good. He's not elite yet. We're going to get to that tier later, but as a blocker, he's definitely good. And yeah, he knows, like I said, he knows what he's doing. Definitely a player that's a value on your team. Next, this is one of my big ones. There's this one and another one that's in the same tier we'll talk about that I am very comfortable defending and very positive. This is the actual case, and that is that Gerald Everett is a top 10 tight end. He is really, really good. My main far and away criticism of Sean McVay since he's been with the Rams is his, and I think he would agree with this too, is his misuse of Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett is a player who very consistently creates space as a receiver, legitimately kills linebackers, beats safeties. After the catch is one of the absolute best tight ends in the NFL. He's up there in the elite tier with the guys that higher into this. He's a little bit better than even a Jonnu Smith, who's famed for that, right? He legitimately very consistently creates yards for your offense if you give him opportunities and targets. Rams did not do that. Part of that is because he was playing on the same team with the tight end right behind him, Tyler Higbee, who's a much better blocker and a team that ran the ball consistently. I understand to a point why they gave him less snaps, but I understand doesn't mean I agree. Yeah, you're just talking about a player who's a legit valuable receiver. who's just been kind of held down by the team he played on. Now, he does have a couple issues, like I said, as a blocker. He's pretty mediocre / whatever, although I will say because of his athleticism, he can do some work down the field that even guys like a Tyler Higbee or maybe even back to like an Austin Hooper aren't going to be able to do because they're just not fast enough to get down there. But he can lack a little bit of physicality as far as receiving the ball over the middle goes. It's not really a big deal, frankly. I mean, he's still in the tier with like a Jared Cook at that. It's still a good thing. It's not like a super big weakness, just not quite as good as these other big tight ends. But yeah, Gerald Everett should be an elite tight end in the NFL. We'll see. I mean, he goes from a smart offense used him wrong to the stupidest offense in the NFL and the Seahawks. So we'll see if that's the team to figure out how to use them. I'm going to go ahead and guess not. But as far as an actual player, if you're starting a team from scratch, absolutely belongs in the top 10. So in the same tier then, we have Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is the second in this higher tier of space users as opposed to space creators. Mark Andrews is like elite as far as a catch point receiver goes at the tight end position, probably the best outside of maybe George Kittle, who's going to be obviously way at the top of this list. And yeah, I mean, he's really valuable as a blocker as well. And as a receiver, he's not really a big time separation guy or really at all, but he kind of fits into the like Tyler Higbee, Jack Doyle area of like, he doesn't suck at it. It's just not like a super strength of his game, but the other stuff, especially the team he plays on, how good he is as a blocker and his ability between like 10 and 25 yards in the middle of the field. I think he's probably the best in the NFL. Maybe Travis Kelce too, but yeah, so he's really good. I do think he maybe gets a little bit overrated because as far as a fantasy guy goes, obviously he's a lot higher than 7th, but yeah, he's definitely a valuable player. So then the next real big one that I feel like I need to explain is Irv Smith at 6 here. So the question with Irv Smith, and this is why I think it's important to make these types of lists, not just look at production or fantasy rankings or the general consensus of a player, is because Irv Smith, if you were to switch him with any of the guys above him, and I went through this pretty extensively, I have basically 100% confidence would perform better than whatever insert that player would have in the situations they've been in their career. I have very little doubt about that. Irv Smith is a player who consistently gets open, like by a lot, in the same tier with Gerald Everett. As a blocker, he's shown to be very good, especially in space down the field, which is extremely valuable. He knows he can make contested catches. As far as after the catch player, he's not elite, but he's above average. He's better than a lot of the guys we talked about so far. And with him, you're talking about a tight end who does everything that is valuable that a tight end can do. And that's why he's this high. Now, the reason that people would argue for him being lower, obviously, is with the sample size of him being just 2 years. I don't have a problem with that. He's shown it on the field. I don't necessarily need a guy to like prove it before I do that, if he clearly has proven it as far as just what he does on the field. And the other thing is the production, especially as far as the receiving tight end goes. But again, similar to a player like Gerald Everett, he's played in a super run-heavy offense with another tight end who, for most of the time, was in the top 20 in Kyle Rudolph, who's slipped out of it now at his age, but got playing time ahead of him as a rookie, understandably. And yeah, just Irv Smith is really, really, really good. If he was on a bigger profile team or with a different style of offense, I would have very little doubt most people would consider him in the top 10 here. But yeah, as of now, I'll keep him at 6. I don't think he does anything better than necessarily the top 5 guys. I think there's a pretty clear gap again right here. But yeah, really, really good player. And again, no doubt that he's pretty much better than everyone ahead of him and would do better in the situations they've been in. So then our top 5. First, Hunter Henry, another big one that is important to remember. I don't really consider injuries for this specific exercise. Hunter Henry, again, just like Irv Smith, does everything that is valuable that a tight end can do on an NFL field. He just does it a little better. And that's mainly the difference. He actually, I think, is a little bit worse as a blocker, but as a receiver, he's like a meaningful amount better. So, yeah, he does everything. He gets open. He knows how to run after the catch. He knows how to adjust his routes in his own coverage. Really valuable player when he's on the field. Then we have Dallas Goedert, number 4. Same thing, just a little bit better. Dallas Goedert is really, really, really good wow, he's been in tough situations, just like some other guys, where he's been the second tight end, understandably, behind a guy who at a younger age was better. And he's still shown he can do this stuff at a super high level. I think most people know with Goedert now that he's this good. But yeah, he's really, really good. When he's on the field, you have a really valuable player. Number 3, Darren Waller. So when I've talked about those two types of tight ends, Darren Waller is the absolute peak, like perfection of the using space tight end as opposed to the creating space. He uses space better than any other tight end in the NFL, unquestionably, bar none. Super, super fast, obviously breaks tackles really, really well, has really strong hands. He's really good. What keeps him a tier down from the top 2 guys here, and what made me for a long time kind of consider him lower than this, is as an actual receiver, especially as a guy who creates separation, he's just not that good. He's way closer to a guy like Johnny Smith or TJ Hawkinson than he is to the Travis Kelce, George Kittle ahead of him. Now, there's still situations because of his speed, and this is something I talked about in the receiver video too, where that doesn't really matter. Because when you're as fast as he is, you're just running like a drag or over route. You don't have to get a route running. You're just faster than the other guy, and he definitely fits in that category. So he's still really useful. And the point is with Darren Waller, despite him having shortcomings there, he is so, so, so good. I consider him actually really similar to a player like Chris Godwin, where he's so good at receiving the ball and making that into positives, to really big positives, that he finishes this high despite his shortcomings as being more of an average to below average blocker. Really good, really valuable. So then the top 2. And the order I had them in: number 2, Travis Kelce; number 1, George Kittle. So you see they're on a tier very far away from everybody else by themselves. And they are really interesting to talk about. So in Travis Kelce, you have the best receiving, like pure receiving tight end in the NFL. A guy who is dominant as a receiver, obviously, who, even if he wasn't playing for the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes would still be that good. I have very little doubt about that, because he fits into with the top wide receivers in the NFL, as far even like a Devontae Adams, who I had number 1, as far as understanding defenses, understanding where he should be to be open in terms of having the physical ability to actually do it, and having the ability and athleticism after the catch to make something out of what he's created. And that's that's the goal, right? That when you draft an offensive player, that is exactly what you want. Travis Kelce provides that. And as a blocker too, while he's not elite, and I actually think that's the difference between him and George Kittle being 1 here, he's still fine. But yeah, George Kittle, number 1. George Kittle is the most dominant, probably space blocker in the NFL, offensive lineman included, to be honest with you. There's a couple guys off the top of my head would be in contention. Even Trent Williams on his own team would be one. But he regularly just erases second-level defenders in the run game, even multiple on the same play. I mean, it's incredible to watch. And for as lower of the value, as I worded that poorly, for as low the value is on the running game compared to the passing game, I don't actually think it's like gigantic. It's not like it's not 100 to 0. It's more like 70 to 30. But when you provide in that 30, whatever of the proportion, such incredible value that you can turn that 30% or whatever into something that works like to the same efficiency as like 60% of a passing game, if that makes sense, that's crazy valuable. And then you add on top of that he's still the second best receiving tight end in the NFL. He actually creates space for himself at the same level as these other guys in the top 5. And as an after the catch dude, he's the only one who even rivals Darren Waller, really. Not that he is quite there, but like he's really good. He's really strong. He's really athletic. He consistently breaks tackles. And you take all that and you talk about a smart player too, who knows how to like beat defenses, not to the same level as Kelce, but still elite. I mean, he's elite at everything that you can be elite at on an NFL field, and is, like I said, probably the best space blocker in the entirety of the NFL. So yeah, that's why I have George Kittle number 1, though I don't really feel like crazy strong. If somebody wanted Travis Kelce, I would understand. I would disagree, but I would get it. But yeah, so that's the top 20 tight ends. Yeah, I think really interesting position. Obviously, there's a pretty clear talent gap at around 5, and then again at around like 12. But yeah, tight ends 2021 NFL.